Many are aware that I worked at Cascade Steel for over 26 years before retiring. What you may not know is that my career involved much more. After working at a berry and vegetable farm from ages 8 to 18, I went on to college at OSU, where I was trained as an agricultural teacher for high schoolers. While at college, I earned a degree in crop science with a minor in horticulture, in addition to my ag education degree. After teaching for 9 years, I became a farm manager for 2 different farms for the next 6 years. It was during this period that sometimes it was imperative that something must be accomplished on a Sunday due to either pending weather, stage of ripeness, timing of manpower, or other reasons. I was always hesitant to work on a Sunday because experience had taught me that it's best to reserve that day as a day of rest. Sunday work usually turned out to be time poorly spent because things would go wrong and very little would get accomplished. I think this was God's way of telling me to honor the Sabbath and thank Him for all the blessings He had bestowed on me and the ground that I worked. The first reading is from Exodus. In the evening, quails came down and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer per person, according to the number of persons provided for those in your own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it, it was an omer. They who gathered much had nothing over, and those who had gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it became wormy and rotten. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, as much as each needed. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil, and all that is left over put aside to keep until morning." So they put it aside until morning, just as Moses commanded them. And it did not rot, and there were no maggots in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day.
Please stand as you're able. And
according to Matthew. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." They said to one another, "It is because we have brought no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he had not told them to be aware of the yeast of the bread, but of the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed on the third day and be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? And what will they give in return for their life?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
In the name of our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. So let's talk about chocolate. I mean Lent. Sorry. What was I thinking? Why is that such a cliche? Why does the idea arise that Lent is about giving up things we enjoy? And why should we? What are we trying to do? Exactly. I mean, is that really what it's about? And if it's not, then what? Is it because we should not enjoy pleasure? Are we supposed to feel shame or guilt when we actually enjoy something? I mean, there's a big streak of Puritan influence in the United States, part of our history. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but there are subcultures that arise in human communities that really seem to be focused on feeling bad about feeling good. That we're so sinful, so broken, so terrible, that love to quote Isaiah, "All our good works are like filthy rags." And rather than seeing that as a poetic hyperbole, take it as a literal evaluation. People that believe not simply in original sin, but total depravity. That we are incapable of any good thought or deed, reaching out toward God in any way. That there is any mark of the image of God on us, and even if we do something good, really it's terrible. So any desire or passion is bad, and it needs to be stomped out. We need to discipline ourselves, in a sense, punish ourselves, deprive ourselves with a kind of vague and ridiculous hope that a desire will just go away, or we'll master it, or control it, ourselves or our world. Maybe to such a degree that we will be consumed by so many feelings of guilt and shame that we won't even want to go near what we desire. We might even develop an aversion to what we want. Now, maybe that's uncharitable in some ways, but I hope that we can get a sense of, what I'm talking about here. And I also don't think we should just jettison negative emotions. Shame, guilt, they aren't bad in and of themselves. Sometimes they can teach us, they can guide us. But the problem I have is that desire is inextricably connected with love. We know who that is. And I don't just mean sexual desire. I mean the desire to love and be loved, to know and be known. The desire for beauty, the desire for wholeness, for nourishment, for health. Desire that draws us to a flower. Desire that stirs up in us whenever we smell fresh baked bread. A warm embrace. An understanding smile. I ask you, why, when you feel sad, do you want to listen to sad music? Why wouldn't you want to listen to music that's cheerful? Because we desire recognition, empathy, connection. We listen to music that connects with our feelings: joy, sadness, fear, anger, laughter, weeping. We yearn for this. We are hungry creatures. We desire. And ultimately, we desire what is ultimate. The source of all desire and its end, God, the divine. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of all good things. And chocolate is a very good thing. And Susan had to leave early, but I know she would be agreeing with me on that point. So why give it up? I hope you realize I'm not just talking about chocolate here, right? Why? Simply because we are hungry creatures. We are very hungry creatures, and we have a tendency to overeat. In fact, let me wax philosophical for a moment here. We are finite creatures, created by an infinite God to desire that infinite God. Therefore, follow me, the one thing about us that is not finite is our desire for the infinite. It might be the one infinite thing about us, our desire, our capacity for love. And anytime someone starts talking about measuring out or weighing love, I know we're getting in trouble fast. Because you can't. We come out of our mother hungry. And even though we eat and we're satisfied for a while, we get hungry again. And we put on a bunch of weight in those first couple months, and eventually we're supposed to start going in the opposite direction, or our health is going to suffer. That is a metaphor for Lent. Finding balance. Learning sustainability. Developing a sense of proportion. Some things are never good for some of us. Some things are fine some of the time for some of us. Some things are fine all of the time for some of us. But we have to learn about that. The ascetic movements begin around this, right? To practice fasting was not to punish yourself as if you're going to try to make recompense for your own sin. It's to learn balance, to learn proportion. To go without a thing teaches you about what you actually need to survive. It teaches you that you don't have to give full rein to your desire. It might teach you other things as well. You might learn what kind of a person you are when your desires aren't fulfilled in the way that you have come to expect. As I said last week, go a few days without food. See how you feel. You'll feel hungry, I promise, but how will you function in life? How do you go about your daily tasks? How do you manage work? How do you treat people? And you start feeling grumpy when you're hungry, short-tempered. Maybe the next time you're feeling grumpy and short-tempered, you realize maybe that has as much to do with yourself as the situation you find yourself in. When we are tested, we learn things. When we test ourselves, we can learn things. I think we also learn something else, though. To give something up, even for a while, is to realign our relationship with it, to shape and hone and manage my desire for something. Might teach me something important about the thing that I desire, the object of my desire, even chocolate. To perceive beauty without consuming it. To have your cake and don't eat it. Then you can have it. And going back to last week, to treat something as an end in itself. Not as a thing to consume, not as a means, not as something to exploit, but something that can be enjoyed without being destroyed. Now, I've gone a while, and I haven't even talked about the readings this morning. But I hope you can kind of see some applications here, especially from our first story about the manna, right? The magic bread that comes down from heaven. It's sort of like forms of film, like frost, and they gather it, and they can make it into these honey cakes. They just sounded like they tasted really good. That's all a miracle in itself, but listen to this. This is what the Lord commanded. Gather as much as each of you needs, an omer, which is an amount of weight per person, according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their tents. The Israelites did so. Some gathered more, some gathered less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said, let no one leave it out over until the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it became wormy and rotten. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it as much as each needed. When the sun grew hot, it melted away. God gives them food every day, enough for the day, and nothing left over. No hoarding, no planning ahead, no gathering too much or too little or too late. Everything in balance, everything in proportion, enough for everyone. But no one's going to start a market trading manna anytime soon. And on the Sabbath, there is still time for rest, because rest is a part of the balance too. This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil. All that is left over, put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning, just as Moses commanded them. And it did not rot. And there were no maggots in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh, which is the Sabbath, there shall be none." On the seventh day, some people did go out and they found none. Moses got mad again. Moses gets mad a lot. Rest, a day off, leisure is built into the plan as well. In Lent, we try to recapture that balance. Quick question. I know some of us are giving up things and we're also taking things on for Lent. Anyone taking on rest? Anyone taking on not working so hard or being so busy? Leaving time for leisure, for relaxation? Some of us need to do that more than we need to work. Some of us might need to work more. So we take from this story about the man of the lesson of balance, of proportion, not overindulging our desire, of a vision of the world that God is giving us in the gift of this manna. And how we should treat one another, and how we should treat our world and the resources that are there. What do we learn from the words of Jesus about yeast and the cross? I think there we learn something particularly for us today, because it is an interesting and unique characteristic of our world and the world that we live in, that we are in a society that runs on consumer capitalism, which depends on innovation, improvement, and newness and technology, or at least the perception that that is happening, because we live in a world where the economy must grow or we all suffer. Right? Economies didn't always operate that way, but that's how it operates now. So we live in a world where desire must be created, especially for things that never existed before. Do you think that Jesus desired a telephone? I know when cell phones first came out, remember this commercial they had, there was like a dartboard, and the person throwing crazy darts and the dartboard would move. It's like, imagine a world where people trying to get in touch with you always could get in touch with you. It was a cell phone ad, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a living nightmare. Now, I honestly, I don't think I could function without it, in my job at least. Desires must be created. I don't know when the craze started with like the 1,000 different kinds of Oreos and M&Ms about 10 years ago. Why? Does this make our lives better? Yes. It makes them different. I don't know if it makes us any happier. I don't know if it brings us more joy or satisfaction. I mean, how many kinds of toothpaste do we need? I don't know. I don't necessarily know the answer to this question. But the question is this really giving us life? Is this really giving us wholeness? Is it bringing us in balance with the world? Is it bringing us proportion, sustainability? When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said, "Watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They said to one another, "It is because we didn't bring any bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You have little faith. What are you talking about, having no bread? Do you not understand what's going on? Do you not remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000? And how many baskets were left over? Or the 4 and the 7, and how many baskets were left over? How could you fail to perceive I was not talking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." And they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. What is yeast? I mean, it's a germ. You mix it with flour, which has some starches in it, right? And some water, and it starts to grow, and it starts to burp. It foams and it makes bread big. The people in Jesus' time didn't know that. They just knew there's this magic stuff, you put it with flour, and it makes it grow. It gives it life. the magic animating power, the divine power of animating our own lives. It was a symbol of life, of growth, of transformation. And the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees was powerful stuff. Make no mistake. Be pure. Be respectable. Support your local empire. Gain power and wealth. Be successful. Don't be a leech. Don't ask too many questions, especially the Sadducees. Their brand of yeast, their brand of life, it can get you far. But be wary. Be wary. I'll never forget the time I was in a grocery store and I saw a magazine. It's a while back. The title of this magazine was Simplicity. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I thought, wait a minute. If I want to try and lead a simple life, I should start buying a magazine, which I'm sure is going to sell me products that align with the simplicity market lifestyle. Capitalism can commodify anything. Anything at all. Spirituality. Go to the local store and buy a Dreamweaver or crystal or whatever. Anything. Religion, faith. Even its greatest critics and enemies are not immune to the power of capitalism. Every time I see this shirt, I just want to laugh. Now look, I'm not here to talk about argument, I'm not here to argue economics today. And I'm not a fan of Marxism either. But I'm deeply skeptical of the life that we are being offered, the story we are being sold on TV, on the internet, by talking heads, by social media, by many of the great leaders of this age. And look, it's hard to measure happiness or joy or satisfaction. But I'm skeptical of those things because I want to hear the wisdom of Jesus, who's telling us to trust in God and God's provision and the divine life that He is offering. The life that fed the 5,000 in the desert. The life that fed the Israelites in the desert. The life that can feed me in the desert that I am in. Whatever that might look like. And look, faith isn't free. Just like food isn't free. Whether you had to go out and gather the manna. You had to pass out the loaves which somebody else made. There's effort and growth and participation in the life of this world. And sometimes it comes at a very high cost, even the cost of a cross, even the cost of death. I mean, never forget, like Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, the great first proclamation of faith, the first evangelist, "You're the Messiah." And Jesus says, "You're right. Don't tell anyone." That's not the way we spread the news. And then he says, by the way, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, they're going to arrest me and kill me. And on the third day I'll rise again. And Peter, being animated by the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees, takes Jesus aside and says, "That's not a good plan, Jesus," which is exactly what I would say. Exactly what I would say. And Peter, who had just renamed Rock, upon whom the church will be built, is called Satan, adversary. And this conversation with Peter ends, and he brings all the disciples together, and he says, if you want to follow me, you need to take up your cross. Those who want to save their life will lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? None of us earned our life. It's the first gift. The very first gift. And it's not just a moment of life or a moment of death. It is the whole process of living and the whole process of dying. It's not the sudden sharp jab of a spear in our side. It's the 1,000 little cuts, the 1,000 little wounds and injuries that Jesus is warning us about. He's saying it's a path, a way of life, a way toward a true life that understands that grasping hold and looking for control isn't just a waste of time. It's a path to a slow disillusion of life. But to trust, to reach out, to manage our fear, to serve, to advocate, to pray, to learn, to fast, to feast. That is like yeast that you put in the dough and over hours blooms and brings life and spaciousness to the loaf. And here, I don't know if you know this little secret. We discovered a few years ago when Michelle was making bread. If you want your bread to really taste good, you put it in the refrigerator. And don't let it just rise over hours. You let it rise over days. And it gets better and better, growing and developing little by little. That's the secret to making amazing tasting bread. I think it's one of the secrets of life that we are learning this season. That's what Lent is all about, Charlie Brown. About giving up and taking on as individuals, as families, as a community, about examining our life together, all together, and find together what is giving life and what is draining it away. Finding balance, learning new perspectives as we realign our relationship with all the world around us. And yes, that can even include chocolate. Amen.